All right, well, today I'm inviting you to join me on what may end up being a journey toward frustration. I don't know if this is going to work. I've been working towards this for a while now because I wanted to have a unit of pikemen. Now, my goal, of course, is to use these pikemen in any number of historical or historical adjacent or really any rank and flank game. Okay. But the most common use they're going to get is probably more for display. So I'm putting more work than usual into the base and things like that because of that. Now, the game that they would be used for probably primarily would be pike and shot, but also I think I can fit them into a Kings of War list. But these guys are pikemen. As you can see from the long pointy sticks, right? And I love pikemen. I love what pikemen represent. That's why I'm picking these as the unit I'm really focusing in on. To me, well, not just to me, to everyone, pikemen represent that shift from antiquity to modernity. It's that, but in some, and it's so cool because the shift from feudalism to the state is what led to pike formations. But in a way, pike formations are a return to more classical looking battles, right? The phalanx was an ancient form of warfare as well. And so the modern world is both progress, but also regression. It's forward and back. It's the state coming back. And when the state exists, there are certain types of warfare it requires. And one of them seems to be pikemen. I love that. I'm fascinated by pikemen, what they represent politically. So I want this to look good. Now, most of these are in a near finished state. There are final touches I need to put on almost every miniature, but I just don't know. I can't judge what they need until I see the situation they're going to be in. So I'm going to make an attempt today to base these. Now, I am attempting to evoke a painting. Let me get the actual details on this so I don't get this wrong. Yes, it's called Rocroi, El Ultimo Tercio. And it is by Ferrier Dalmau, who is a contemporary painter. He just made something that shows up a lot in Google Images when you look for pikemen, but this image just really captures what I am going for with the political importance of the pikemen. So I don't know, look it up. El Ultimo Tercio. And tercio is Tercio, because that's the pike formation that was made famous by the Spanish Empire. Now, what I'm making here is only approximated tercio, in that I will, at least right now, I will not be putting musketeers in there. Musketeers would have been present in the Spanish tercio, but in most of the games I'm using, they will be distinct. So I might stick a few in there later if there's room on the base, but for now, I'm not going to be basing any musketeers. Okay, so I also have these horse corpses that are going to go on the base. And the purpose of these guys is twofold. Well, one, they're in the painting, and they feature really prominently in the painting. So, I knew I was going to do that from the beginning. But they also represent something, right? Because what the pike formation does is it supplants feudalism. So, the picture of this pike formation doing harm to horses is actually highly symbolic and important to the display. So we are going to have horse casualties on there. I'm not going to glue them down just yet because I might have to shift them as we put the units in. Okay, so this is a symbolic display piece meant for use in 2 different games, but let's be honest, it's mostly going to be on my shelf. So we want it to look good. Now, let's start by just exploring the different angles of pike we have here. So we have these guys who are holding them straight out, right? So let's collect how many of those we can base first. Oh yeah, and here's a guy who's holding it. Yeah, that counts. I want him to be kind of central because he represents something interesting as well. Let's see, who else is holding their pike straight up? This guy right here. The reason, by the way, that I said that I expect this to be a failure in some ways, or at least I have suspicion that we might be walking into a situation where we leave unsatisfied, is because I'm trying to mount metal and plastic minis on what is essentially a light base. When I made this base, I thought that this was going to be mostly only plastic minis, but I quickly learned that to get the look I was going for, I was going to have metal minis in there as well. And that is frustrating because I didn't quite make a base that really is appropriate to them. But we'll see. Okay, so it looks like there's 6 guys that I can really justify holding it straight out. And then we have these guys who are holding it at a 45-degree angle. So they could be like aesthetically, they could still fit on the front line, but they could also be right behind the guys holding it straight out when we would get closer to the proper formation. Now, I'm not too worried about having these guys actually stand in a good pike formation because this is meant to represent the end stages of a battle, not the beginning stages. And these fellas have been through it, so we will forgive them for a little lax discipline. Okay. So it looks like I have 6 guys who could justifiably be said to be holding it at a 45-degree angle. And then we have the guys who are holding their sticks straight up and down. So let's count those. We have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so we have twice as many of those, which is good because they're gonna really fill out this look, and they feature prominently in the painting. Okay, so then we have some unusual guys. We have this guy who's some kind of officer. We have our musician, and then we have this guy who's carrying a bag. Okay, so the officer needs to be somewhat central to this. So I'm thinking we go ahead and glue him in right there. Now, in a normal thing, in a normal war game setup, we'd probably glue him right here so he can be the centerpiece of the army. But I kind of want to have a little dead space here. So that's how we're going to start. Here's the moment of high anxiety for me as we glue this man's feet. Place him firmly in the center of our display here. Our ultimo tertio begins. Now, the importance of the pike formation in this context as a political harbinger is that, and it's why I love this painting, is because the painting shows the triumphant pikemen standing with horse corpses around them, right? And the fallen French soldiers who actually won that battle. It's kind of funny that it's a triumphant pose. Because we're looking at the losers there in this painting. But the what the pikemen do is they represent the infantry revolution. Feudal societies create a warrior class. Feudal societies create a system of gathering troops that is built on loyalty and land and honor. And as we start to transition out of feudalism, we get a money economy, we get economic growth, we get absolutism, we get centralized states. And those are all consequences of the fact that you can beat a warrior class with professional soldiers. And you can kill knights with numbers. So the type of formation that is necessary to get to put an end to a feudal army is a bunch of dudes trained to hold pikes together. And the way you get that is you have to pay them. And so to pay them, that means you need lots of money. And so to get lots of money, that means you need to centralize your state because you need taxation, you need census records, you need bureaucracy, right? You need all the kinds of things that feudalism is really bad at producing. And that's what the pikeman represents. The pikeman represents the growth of the state. It represents the end of feudalism. It represents this changing of the guard of history in some ways, you know. So a pike formation is a is a political event. It's a political herald. It says the time is coming, things are changing, the world's different now. We got to get some pikes. I love it. I love everything it means. It is such a powerful symbol. So I want to have some on a table. So we're going to try. Now, so far, you might think, oh, this is working really well. These guys are standing up. But these are plastic guys. Soon we will test this. Because here's one. You know, one of these metal guys weighs about as much as all the plastic guys together. I'm going to be honest. I don't know if he's going to stand up here. Now, I'm not going to, again, as I said before, I'm not going to put them in good formation here. I'm going to represent good formation with them. And that is quite a bit different. Okay, so that's a metal mini, and he's standing upright. Let's bathe him in glue. Okay. And I want these guys with helmets to stand kind of prominently here in the picture. Because different styles of Spanish armor are featured heavily in the painting because it's supposed to represent, you know, like the end of different eras of Spanish history. It's kind of romantic in that regard. But I wanted to do honor to that by the way that I presented these guys here as well. I think we're probably going to have 3 of them on each side with this particular angle of pike. You went right in there. Very good. Oh, here, this guy's kind of special. This guy has his short sword drawn out. And what I like about that is it reminds us that when these pikes come together in the push of pike, as they say, it's going to get nasty. It's going to be a time for crawling around with a dagger sometimes just as much as standing arm in arm with your brothers with a pike. Oh no, it begins, it begins. He falls, the formation falls. That's the other nice thing about pikemen and the way that it represents the state is that the individual valor of an individual pikeman doesn't matter very much. It is the whole. What better illustration could you get of the Leviathan as described by Thomas Hobbes? You know that famous engraving on the cover of Hobbes' Leviathan where it shows the giant man who is constructed out of thousands of people, right? That is the state, and that is what the pikeman represents. This is the Leviathan. This is bureaucracy. This is government. This is the coming of the modern world, and it will crash into feudalism and it will subsume it. Or rather, feudalism will charge into it and be impaled on these pikes. That is what the pikemen represent. I think that's worthy of a unit here. Okay, so far, so good. I think it's time that we add our drummer, our musician. I think he's going to stand right here. Close to the front, but not too close. I think in an actual formation he would be a bit to the side, but I want to draw the eye to the middle here. And in the painting he's in the middle, so it all works out. You can see why I needed to place some of these guys before I knew what details to add at the end, right? Because some of them are just going to be so in with their brothers here. Not brothers, fellow citizens. Again, this is a statehood conversation we're having here. They're going to need a little more support. Now, he's not in a pose that really lends itself to this kind of basing. He might need a little extra attention for this to work. We've lost our musician. We will now be out of step. That's another cool thing. Formation matters so much with pikes, right? Doesn't matter with the knights. I mean, technically, yes, but not in the way we talk about them, think about them, represent them, train them. The knight is the individual of valor. and certain types of political systems produce knights, and certain types of political systems produce infantry. And states are the ones that produce infantry, produce pikemen, produce what we have here. It is a political reality that affects where the politics affects warfare. But it's not just the politics affecting warfare, because the warfare also affects politics. Because what's going to happen as this becomes the primary way to fight wars? What spreads? It's not, the feudal societies know that this is the future. They see it written on the battlefields of Europe. So if you're a feudal society and you're facing a centralizing system, what do you have to do? You have two choices. You convert or die. And thus we see the institutions of the state begin to spread all throughout Europe. And this is European state development. This is the movement toward the modern world, right? It's all represented here by these guys with sticks. All right, so now we're going to get these guys who hold their sticks more straight up and down. 45-degree angle for these. So I'm going to put some of them in rank with these frontliners, but I'm going to start to fade them toward the back line. The intent will be to create a picture of a well-ordered, but a little bit out of step formation here. Let's get a little more glue. This guy's having trouble standing. It's because I'm trying to put him directly on this grass that I've already flocked down. So it doesn't work as well. It's okay. It'll work. I think I've made some of the whites too bright on this. I might need to darken them down a little bit with a wash or a glaze or something. Because I really want to draw attention to the pikes. I want to draw attention to the helmets. And I want to draw attention to the faces. I don't really want to draw attention to the gloves or the bags. Those aren't really thematically important to what's going on here. All right, this may be my first example of a guy who is not cooperating. This is a metal unit. He's a little bit too heavy for the pose I was trying to put him in, so I will find a way to think about that. Let's try putting him more in the back line right here. I won't try and put him directly on vegetation like I was trying there. I'll leave that to a plastic guy. He can fit right here. And that pose looks more natural anyway, so we'll give him the time to dry there. Yeah, that'll be just fine. And again, the intent here is to remind the observer of the Spanish tercios, those celebrated infantry formations that dominated European warfare for a long time. For a couple hundred years, these guys were the ones to beat. And the painting is of a time when they eventually did get beat. Because the cavalry had to adapt, right? The adaptation to fight these kind of guys was cavalry with guns. It's a scary thought, right? They ride up, they shoot at you, and then they ride off. Of course, the tercios had tools to deal with that. It wasn't a real situation of the technology changing to make the politics change, but it is a necessary evolution of the problem, right? There we go. See, he can stand. He just needs a little help. Let me find a plastic guy, though. Here's one. Here's one in plastic that can guard our flank. All right, let's give him a little glue. And let's see how he can defend his empire. Out here on the side. Yeah, that's going to work fine. That's going to be good. Look at that. Oh, it's coming together. We are basing it up. Okay. Let's see. Let's do another angle guy. He'll stand here in the gap, or here, or here. We'll do here so we can fit some up and down fellas in the rear. Okay. Put him right here. Actually, yeah, we'll do him here. Yeah, that's the right spot. Like that. That's working. Very good. You know, you can go too far with trying to explain political development through war. There are certainly people who overstate the case, but when you look at the Spanish tercio, you have to admit that there's something there. You know, you have to admit that the power of a formation like this represents a kind of political change. Now, does it drive political changes? Well, I am persuaded that it does in some way, right? But it's not all of it. So the people who want to critique the bellicist theories of state formation, you know, there's something there. But they explain a lot. They also explain that old puzzle popularized by everybody, but, you know, people like to reference Jared Diamond on this, where one of the big questions of history you have to answer is, why did Europe explode into power and then conquer the rest of the world, and why didn't you see that in other places, you know? And I think the bellicist theory provides a really nice answer to that. It's because Europe was engaged in the most bloody constant period of warfare in human history. And, you know, in other parts of the world, you have a big war and somebody wins, and then they establish their empire, and then you move on. But in Europe, when you have your big war, the winners just trade some colonies, trade some influence, some titles, and the losers get ready for the next one. And what do they have to do to get ready for the next one? Well, they have to look more like the people that beat them. So in this case, that means learning how to tax better, learning how to abandon your feudalism faster, learning how to absolutize, learning how to make pikemen. Because feudalism is a system that is built to try and produce knights. And the state is a system that is built to produce pikemen. And it kind of still is. The state creates bureaucracy, and bureaucracy creates the state. But why do they create each other? Well, the real answer, at least in some limited sense, is because of external pressure. They expect war to come, and they know that the way to win a war these days is money. Got to have an effect, you know? And I'm building a illustration of that principle here. Stay, please stay. Hold your ground, soldier. All right, now. So these are all the guys who are facing their pikes forward. Now we're going to transition to the ones who hold it straight up and down. But before we do, let's get our the guy left holding the bag. He forgot his pike today, so he gets to stand here and shout with his bag. But you know what? Someone's got to carry the captain's snack. You know, he's got an important job too. Just because he's not holding the pike doesn't mean it doesn't matter. He might be one of those bureaucrats that was created. He might be the most important one here in the army, from a certain point of view. He might be the one who has to report back to the monarch, you know? Okay. Let's try and put one guy down here. Ooh, I got a whiff of that glue. So that is not for breathing right there. Or maybe it is. Who knows? Not by me. I was always worried about this guy. He is in a pose that is not well balanced. But he's plastic and light, so maybe he'll stand. maybe everything will be hunky-dory. Ultimo tertio. Let's just glob some glue down and see what happens. Some of you are screaming at me. It dries on contact. You can't just glob it down. And I say that's what they want you to think. That's the difference between theory and practice. Yes, in theory, just throwing down super glue shouldn't make something more sturdy, but in my experience, you can actually just stand in a mound of dried glue and it's transparent, it's strong, and it works. So keep that in mind next time somebody tells you what you can and can't do with your own glue collection. Although this guy is still remaining stubborn, I think we're getting somewhere. I think we're getting somewhere. Still wants to lean, doesn't he? Of course, eventually, the empires of heavy infantry and cavalry and musketeers would run into a more powerful enemy than absolutist bureaucratic states. There was development yet to happen. And the French were the first to show the world the danger of that. But not the French that are represented in this painting. Not the Bourbon French who still had their nobility and gentility. No, we're talking about the French Republic. Republicanism and liberalism later. A quality that was perhaps more lacking than you would want in the actual French republics, but, you know, it does represent a next layer. You know, you think that absolutist bureaucratic taxing states are the best way to raise large armies, and maybe they are, but boy, do they have a challenge when they face nationalism, which is what the French Revolution really started. Maybe if ideology can compel people to fight, maybe there are types of recruitment you don't need anymore, you know? And this is kind of what Machiavelli was getting at when he critiqued the mercenary soldiers, you know? He complained that if the soldiers aren't ideologically connected to the state, or if they don't love the country, you know, they're going to be a problem eventually for you. Especially if the time comes and you can't pay them. But patriotic soldiers who love their homeland, who are coming to fight, now there's a soldier that won't turn on you if you don't pay them, usually. There's a soldier that will, you know, in the feudal era, you could see armies of hundreds of soldiers. In the pike and shot era, we would go to, you know, hundreds of thousands. But it takes ideology and modernity and liberalism and totalitarianism for us to get armies of millions. And that's the next step. That's what can undo the tertio. You know, Napoleon swept through Europe as a new kind of threat. The next step in that stage, the march of history. That's another thing I would like to one day have represented, something Napoleonic. But in the miniatures world, once you cross the line into Napoleonics, you've done something. That's a dangerous place to go. So we'll take our time with that. But you know, absolutism beats feudalism, and then republicanism beats absolutism, and then liberalism beats republicanism and democracy. kind of develops them all. And then you get the 20th century showdown of ideologies between liberalism and fascism and communism. And man, isn't that a test? Isn't that where the ideologies really clash? And by that point, we abandoned this. We've moved on. The war has demanded new politics, and politics have demanded new war. And then you get total war and industrial war and mechanical war as the ideologies get tested there. And liberalism just kept winning. And it even ended up beating communism, throughout to the end of the Cold War. And that process led people to wonder, is that the end? I mean, we hadn't seen a 3-time consecutive victory for an ideology before. Maybe it's really over. And that's what Francis Fukuyama meant by the end of history. That much maligned phrase now. It's not stupid. He really was. He was looking at a real situation, And also, he wasn't triumphalist either. He was warning, too. But there's truth to that. Especially if you think about the 90s and the 2000s, There really was this question, like, can the world even sustain a challenger to liberalism? Or is it just going to be an arms race to see who can become the most liberal and democratic? And I know that it sounds kind of silly now in the context of what we know, but it wasn't silly at the time. It really did seem like the situation we were facing. And it's because this process kept going and kept continuing. And it seemed to have hit a dead end. Which kind of leads to an interesting question, right? Obviously that didn't happen. So what are the challenger ideologies now? And might they demand different kinds of war? And different kinds of states? I don't know. It's not a question I have an answer to. I would like to have the answer to it. What's going on in, what does Russia represent right now? Besides wars of expansion and bringing territorial conflict back into the world and having a non-Westphalian view of state sovereignty. Those are all things that Russia is doing and is contributing to in our conversation, and things that people rightfully view with alarm and skepticism. But does that mean that they've really found a new challenge? I mean, what would the ideology be? Putin's kind of a authoritarian thug. He doesn't represent anything new in terms of ideas necessarily. His religious appeals are somewhat new in terms of ideas, but they're the old religious appeals of empire, and that's why he will proclaim both Christianity and Islam, that's why he doesn't really represent something new in that respect. He's just returning to an old form, and it gets badly distorted here in the West because we don't understand religion very well sometimes. But I don't think there's anything new there. So maybe it's China. We haven't really reckoned much with the fact that China did not democratize the way we all thought it would. The way people victoriously proclaimed it obviously would when, Deng Xiaoping began his reforms and pragmatism, and the Communist Party stopped being socialist completely. That's a wild thing to happen. You might think maybe the end of history is right. Maybe Francis Fukuyama is onto something, but now what do we make of the fact that there are some ways in which they're outperforming the democracies of the world, right? But if that's the case, what's the ideology? What do you call it? you know, we have Xi Jinping thought. Probably not that, though. Don't think there's actually that much new and useful stuff there in terms of ideology. There's some very effective pragmatism. There's some personalization of authority. Maybe it's the blend of Neo-Confucianism with Chinese communism that we see developing, or not developing, that we see being promoted. Maybe that's the new ideology challenge. I don't know. I'm skeptical. But I don't want to write it off either. It's possible. But none of them seem like things that I'm currently could nail down and say that's the challenge. That's the next step. Because I also can't imagine, you know, what changes to warfare do those things demand, right? It's not obvious to me. This is a problem. This soldier has fallen, and he's about to drop his pike. Now we're in trouble. This is that part I darkly foreshadowed when I said there may be some frustration in this video, because I'm afraid his extraction might take other soldiers down with him. And though I'm not against having casualties in the diorama, it's not the goal of this part here. So I'm going to see if I can extract this fallen soldier. Okay. Mostly okay. So first things first, let's get him his pike back. Yeah, there we go. Okay. See, he's restored. He's ready to be back in action. And he still has glue on his little toesies, so maybe I'll dab a little bit more there and then back to the fire with him. Yes, sir. This guy is in good shape. I did spill a little glue. I don't want that on my tray, so let's sweep that up real fast. But I guess the reason I keep saying this or that thing doesn't seem like a real ideological challenge is because we still know that they're not as efficient, right? Putin's authoritarianism is probably what led to the disastrous opening weeks of the invasion of Ukraine. He had the same problems the Soviet Union did probably in knowing how many soldiers he had where, you know? That kind of authoritarianism breeds corruption. Corruption is about the worst thing you can have for this. So what? Does China have something to offer that could constrain corruption? Can they dodge the authoritarian trap? Certainly doesn't seem like it, especially not with the way their economy works with the global economy. If anything, you'd think it works the other way, right? They got the worst of both worlds. So I don't know. Maybe you should tell me. What's the next ideological challenge? And in identifying it, what kind of warfare will it demand? You know, sometimes people say ideologies are false gods. Well, if so, those gods demand sacrifice. And those sacrifices are paid in blood, right? Ideology is war adjacent. Political development is war. Taxation is war. Regime type is war. It's all war. Which is why I want to explore these themes in the context of a war game piece, right? Because war hides behind all these conversations. And we need to be able to recognize that. We need to be able to deal with that in constructive ways. I'm going to move this guy. He is struggling in his assignment. get into a better part of the battle. Let's put him, yeah, that'll be a good spot for him right there. He can lean against his buddy, actually. That'll be ideal. All right, one last guy to put in. He's a metal one, well-armed, ready to poke. By the way, these are sharp. I impaled my hand on these multiple times during painting. That tip right there, that could draw blood. Anyway, it's nice to have minis that could draw blood. And by the way, the reason that it's more, that's the case in a lot of the other stuff I paint isn't that way is because these are metal, right? A sharp tip on a little plastic stick, it'll break before it breaks you. That is not the case with these metal dudes. They will stab you just as readily as French cavalry. But I will say, all these bright reds, all paint. I have not mingled my blood in with the acrylics. And I would not do so. I do not think that's very sanitary. And if you can say nothing else for my painting, let's say that it's sanitary, huh? All right, well, what do we think? La Ultimo Tercio? Is this good? We'll find out.